Steve Harvey put down his microphone. He walked to the edge of the stage. And he did something no one in that studio, no one watching at home, ever expected to see. The game had been going perfectly. Laughter filled the studio. The Johnson family was ahead by 40 points. Steve was in his element, cracking jokes, doing his signature walk, making the audience roar. But then Patricia Johnson stepped up to the podium for the final answer. And everything changed. She didn't answer the question. Instead, she looked directly at Steve, her voice shaking, and said, "Mr. Harvey, before we finish, I need to tell you something. You saved my son's life, and you don't even know it." The audience went silent. Steve froze. His smile faded. The cameras kept rolling, but for the first time in 30 years of hosting, Steve Harvey had no words. What happened next wasn't scripted. It wasn't planned. It was one of the most powerful moments in television history. And if you think you know where this is going, you're wrong. Because what Patricia confessed, and what Steve did in response, changed not just that family, but everyone who witnessed it. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. It started 3 hours earlier, in the green room backstage. The Johnson family was nervous, laughing too loud, checking their clothes in the mirror. Patricia's hands wouldn't stop shaking. Her sister Angela kept asking if she was okay. Patricia just nodded and smiled, but inside, her heart was breaking. Because she wasn't there to win money. She wasn't there for the vacation package or the new car. She was there for her son, Marcus. And Marcus wasn't with them. He couldn't be. 6 months earlier, Marcus had tried to take his own life. He was 16 years old, failing in school, being bullied, feeling like he had no future. He locked himself in the bathroom with a bottle of pills. And the only reason Patricia found him in time was because she heard something on the TV in the next room. Steve Harvey's voice. Marcus had been watching Family Feud. He always watched it. It was the one show that made him laugh, the 1 hour of the day where the pain stopped. And that day, Steve said something during the show that made Marcus pause. Steve was talking to a contestant who had lost everything, and he said, "You are not your circumstances. You are not your pain. You are bigger than what you're going through, and somebody needs you to survive this." Marcus heard those words through the bathroom door. And he unlocked it. Patricia found him on the floor, crying, the bottle still sealed in his hand. They spent 2 weeks in the hospital. 3 months in therapy. And slowly, Marcus started to come back. He started to smile again. He started to believe that maybe, just maybe, he was bigger than his pain. But here's what no one in that studio knew yet. Here's the part that would bring Steve Harvey to his knees. Patricia had written to the show 6 times. She explained what happened. She told them she didn't care about winning. She just wanted to stand on that stage, look Steve in the eye, and say thank you. The producers read the letters. They selected the Johnson family. But they didn't tell Steve. They wanted his reaction to be real. And now, standing at that podium, with the game clock paused and the studio lights burning bright, Patricia was about to keep her promise to her son. "Mr. Harvey," she said, her voice cracking. "6 months ago, my son was going to end his life. He had the pills in his hand. But he heard your voice on the TV. He heard you say that he was bigger than his pain. And he stopped." Steve's face changed. The comedian, the entertainer, the man who always had the perfect comeback, was gone. In his place was just a man. A father. A human being hearing that his words had saved a life. He didn't move at first. He just stared at her, his eyes filling with tears. The audience was silent. You could hear people crying in the seats. The other family, the Smiths, who were supposed to be competing, were standing with their hands over their hearts. And then Steve did something no host had ever done in the history of Family Feud. He walked off his mark. He put down his microphone. He walked across the stage, past the podium, past the game board, and he pulled Patricia into his arms. "Where is he?" Steve whispered into her shoulder. "Where's your son?" "He's at home. Patricia said, sobbing. He wanted to be here, but he was too scared. He thought you wouldn't remember. He thought it didn't matter. Steve pulled back, looked her in the eyes, and said, It matters. He matters. And I need you to tell him something for me. The entire studio leaned forward. Even the cameramen were crying. This wasn't a game show anymore. It was a moment of grace. Tell Marcus, Steve said, his voice breaking, that I'm proud of him. Tell him that surviving is the bravest thing he'll ever do. And tell him that I want to meet him. Not here. Not on camera. Just him and me. Because he needs to know that his life has purpose. Patricia collapsed into Steve's chest. The audience erupted, not in applause, but in a collective wave of emotion. People were standing, crying, holding each other. The Smith family walked across the stage and embraced the Johnsons. The producers in the control room were wiping their eyes. One of them whispered into the headset, Keep rolling. Don't you dare cut away. And then Steve did something that no one saw coming. He took off his suit jacket. It was a custom-tailored piece, expensive, something he wore with pride. He folded it carefully, walked back to Patricia, and handed it to her. This is for Marcus, Steve said. When you get home, you give this to him. You tell him that Steve Harvey believes in him. And every time he wears it, every time he even looks at it, I want him to remember that he is not alone. That he is loved. And that his story isn't over. Patricia held the jacket like it was made of gold. She couldn't speak. She could barely breathe. But she nodded, and Steve nodded back, and in that moment something passed between them that words could never capture. The game didn't continue. The producers made the call. Both families would win. The Johnsons and the Smiths would split the prize. Because what had just happened was bigger than points. It was bigger than television. It was a reminder that sometimes, in the middle of all the noise and lights and competition, life breaks through. And when it does, you stop everything. You put down the microphone. You walk across the stage. And you show up. 3 weeks later, Steve Harvey flew to Detroit on his day off. No cameras. No crew. Just him, his driver, and a promise. He met Marcus in a quiet park, away from the noise. They sat on a bench for 2 hours. Steve didn't preach. He didn't perform. He just listened. And when Marcus finally looked up and said, I'm trying, Mr. Harvey. I'm really trying. Steve put his hand on the kid's shoulder and said, That's all any of us can do. Keep trying. Keep showing up. Because the world needs you here. Marcus wore the jacket to his high school graduation. He wore it to his first job interview. He wore it on the day he got accepted to college. And every time someone asked him about it, he told them the story. Not about winning a game show. But about the moment a stranger became a lifeline. About the moment he learned that his pain didn't define him. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. Steve Harvey talks about that day in interviews now. He calls it one of the most important moments of his career. Not because it was dramatic. Not because it went viral. But because it reminded him why he does what he does. I thought I was just a host, Steve said in an interview months later. I thought I was there to make people laugh, to keep the game moving, to fill the time. But Patricia taught me something that day. She taught me that every word matters. Every moment matters. Because you never know who's listening. You never know whose life is hanging by a thread, and your voice might be the thing that pulls them back. He keeps a photo from that day in his dressing room. It's not a professional shot. It's a picture someone in the audience took on their phone. It shows Steve and Patricia embracing, the game board glowing behind them, the audience on their feet. And in the corner, barely visible, you can see the jacket draped over Patricia's arm. That jacket became a symbol. Not of wealth. Not of fame. But of presence. Of showing up. Of caring enough to stop the show, to break the script, to say, you matter. Your pain matters. And I see you. Marcus is 22 now. He's studying psychology. He wants to be a counselor, to work with kids who feel the way he once felt. He still has the jacket. It hangs in his closet, and he says he'll never get rid of it. Because every time he sees it, he remembers that one moment can change everything. One voice can save a life. And one act of kindness can echo for years. But the story didn't end there. Because 6 months after that meeting in the park, Marcus did something that surprised even Steve. He started a program at his high school called the Jacket Project. The concept was simple but powerful. Students who were struggling, who felt alone, who needed a reminder that someone believed in them, could request to borrow a jacket. Not just any jacket, but one donated by someone who cared. Each jacket came with a note, a message of hope, a reminder that pain is temporary but purpose is permanent. The program started with 5 jackets. Within a year, it spread to 12 schools across Michigan. Students who had never met each other were connected by fabric and faith. A senior who had lost her mother wore a jacket donated by a teacher who had survived cancer. A freshman dealing with anxiety wore one given by a coach who understood what it meant to feel paralyzed by fear. And at the center of it all was Marcus, the kid who had once held pills in his hand, now holding space for others to heal. Steve heard about the program through Patricia. She sent him photos, articles, testimonials from kids whose lives had been changed. And Steve did what he always does when something moves him: he showed up. He flew back to Detroit, walked into Marcus's school unannounced, and donated 50 custom jackets with one message embroidered on the inside pocket. "You matter. Keep going." The students didn't know he was coming. When Steve walked into the gymnasium during an assembly, the room erupted. But Steve wasn't there for applause. He was there to tell them what Patricia had told him, that their pain didn't define them. That their story wasn't over. That someone, somewhere, believed they were worth saving. "I'm not special," Steve told them that day, his voice echoing through the gym. "I'm just a man who got lucky enough to say the right words at the right time. But you're the ones doing the real work. You're surviving. You're showing up. You're choosing to live even when it's hard. And that makes you heroes." Marcus stood beside him on that stage, wearing the original jacket Steve had given his mother. And for the first time since that day on Family Feud, he spoke publicly about what had happened. He told the students about the pills, about the bathroom, about the moment he heard Steve's voice and decided to unlock the door. He told them that survival isn't pretty. It's messy and painful, and sometimes it feels impossible. But it's worth it. Because on the other side of that pain is purpose. And purpose changes everything. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. Teachers were crying. Students were hugging. And Steve, the man who had spent decades making people laugh, stood there with tears streaming down his face, watching a kid he had saved now saving others. But there's one more layer to this story. One more moment that reveals just how deeply this experience changed Steve Harvey. 2 years after that Family Feud episode, Steve was giving a keynote speech at a mental health awareness conference. He rarely talks about his personal struggles, but that night, he opened up in a way he never had before. "I need to be honest with you," Steve said to the audience of therapists, counselors, and advocates. "When Patricia told me I saved her son's life, my first thought wasn't pride. It was terror. Because I realized that for every Marcus who heard those words and chose to live, there might have been someone else who didn't. Someone who needed to hear it but wasn't watching that day. Someone who was alone in that moment. And that responsibility, that weight, it changed me." He paused, his voice breaking. "I used to think my job was to entertain. To make people forget their problems for an hour. But Patricia taught me that visibility is responsibility. That every platform is a pulpit. And if I'm going to stand in front of millions of people, I'd better make sure I'm saying something that matters." The audience was silent. This wasn't the Steve Harvey they knew from television. This was a man wrestling with the gift and burden of influence. And he wasn't done. "After I met Marcus, I couldn't sleep for weeks," Steve continued. "I kept thinking about all the times I could have said something deeper, something more meaningful, But I chose the joke instead. I chose the easy laugh. And don't get me wrong, laughter matters. Joy matters. But so does truth. So does telling people that their pain is valid, that their struggle is real, and that they don't have to carry it alone. He looked directly into the camera recording the speech. So if you're watching this, and you're in that dark place right now, I need you to hear me. Not Steve Harvey the entertainer. Me. Steve. A man who has failed, who has hurt, who has questioned whether he matters. You do not have to be perfect to be worthy of love. You do not have to have it all together to deserve to be here. You just have to keep breathing. Keep showing up. Keep trying. Because I promise you, the world needs your story. Even if you can't see it yet. That clip from the conference went viral. It was shared millions of times. And in the comments, thousands of people wrote the same thing. I needed to hear this today. Some shared that they had been planning to end their lives that week. Others said they had been struggling in silence for years. And Steve's words, his vulnerability, his willingness to admit that he didn't have all the answers, gave them permission to keep going. Marcus watched that speech from his dorm room. He called his mother, crying. "Mom," he said, "Steve just told my story to the world. He didn't use my name, but he told it. And now other people are going to be okay because of it." Patricia smiled through her tears. "Baby, that's what happens when you turn your pain into purpose. It multiplies. It echoes. And it saves lives you'll never even meet." Steve Harvey didn't just host a game show that day. He became a reminder that behind every smile, every laugh, every game, there's a human story. And sometimes, the greatest thing you can do is stop, listen, and love people right where they are. That's the legacy. That's the lesson. And that's why this story will never be forgotten.